In one day, you can be a veterinarian fixing your stuffed animal from their illness. You can be a dragon protecting its treasure, or you can be a parent caring for her children. For me, my favorite thing was to run around the backyard with a stick and pretend to be a wizard like in Harry Potter. Imagination is a large part of being a child, but some have argued that having too big of an imagination can be bad for certain aspects of development. Now, I'm pretty sure that all of us know what imagination is, but there is a specific aspect of imagination that I'll be talking about today that we might not all be as familiar with, and that is fantasy orientation. Fantasy orientation is defined as the individual's tendency to think and play in a fantastical way. A great deal of research has been conducted on this topic, and through that research, 4 constructs have been created: fantastical entities, pretense, cognitions, and toys and games. Fantastical entities are a belief in specific fantastical characters like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. This also includes having an imaginary companion, which includes both an invisible friend and a personified object, which is a doll or a stuffed animal that the person truly believes is real. Pretense is related to pretend play, so this would include pretending to be an animal or another person or a machine while you're playing. Fantastical cognitions are thoughts that are fantasy related, so this would include thinking about the angels up in heaven watching over you as you are about to fall asleep. Fantastical toys and games Fantastical toys and games are pre-made toys, games, and TV shows that are more fantasy-related than reality-based. An example of a fantasy-oriented toy would be a set of dragons, since dragons aren't actually real, or the Monster High dolls that you see up here, where a more reality-based toy would be a truck, since trucks are actually real. Now, no one will argue that having an imagination is all bad, but some will say that having too big of an imagination can affect your cognitive development specifically. There's been a great deal of research that specifically looks at the effect of fantasy orientation on your executive function skills. Executive function is defined as higher order cognitive processes that assist in recognition and control of an individual's thoughts and actions. There are several different aspects of executive function, but today we'll just be looking at attentional shifting. Executive function skills help you to self-plan, for working memory, for attention, and inhibition. Executive function skills typically begin to develop around preschool age, which is also the time that fantasy orientation is at its peak. Attentional shifting specifically is, as it sounds, the ability to shift your attention from one thing to another. This is a very important skill for children to develop because when they're in school, they have to be able to shift their attention from reading class to math class. And now, as I mentioned earlier, there is a debate as to whether fantasy orientation is good or bad for your executive function. A great deal of research has been done on this topic. Some research says that fantasy orientation has absolutely no effect on your executive function. Other research has found that fantasy orientation as a whole is good for your executive function, while other researchers have found that specific fantasy orientation constructs help your executive function, while other constructs hinder your executive function. Since this topic is highly debated and there's really no clear answer, I decided it's pretty important to have this answer, especially as parents trying to decide what's good and bad for your children. So I decided to conduct my own research on this very topic for my honors project. As growing up, I'm an only child, so I played a lot with pretend play because I didn't have a sibling to play with. I loved to pretend to be different people, animals, and even when I did play with my friends, it was always pretend related, running around the backyard, pretending to be wizards, as I mentioned earlier. So I thought, could something as simple as how or what I play really affect my cognitive development? So I decided to conduct my own research with the hypothesis that children with a higher level of fantasy orientation will have greater executive function skills. So last spring, I conducted my research in the Culture and Development Lab here at UWGB with the assistance of Dr. Sawa Senzaki and my fellow research assistants. We had 38 participants between the ages of 3 and 4 come in with one of their parents. To test for fantasy orientation, I created a questionnaire that had 12 questions on it, and it was adapted from 2 previous fantasy orientation questionnaires. I had the parents fill it out regarding their child, and then we turned into an oral interview to ask the children the question so they didn't have to read it and understand it that way. To test for attentional shifting, I used the DCCS task, or the Dimensional Change Card Sort task. Now in this task, you have 2 boxes and a set of cards that need to be sorted into those boxes. At first, the child is instructed to sort the cards by color. So to be correct in this example here, the child would need to sort that red star card into the red truck box because they needed to sort it by color. They do this for several trials, and then following the several trials by sorting by color, the child is then asked to sort by shape instead. So now this time, the correct answer would be for the child to sort the red star card into the blue star box. This is incredibly difficult for the child because they had just been trained for several trials to be sorting it by color, and now they suddenly have to switch. After analyzing our results from this study, we found several different correlations between fantasy orientation and executive function. First, as predicted, we did find some age differences in the DCCS performance. 4-year-olds significantly perform better than 3-year-olds on DCCS, which was predicted, and this goes along with what other research has found as well. We also found another age difference in the report of fantasy orientation. We found that parents of 4-year-olds were more likely to report fantasy orientation than parents of 3-year-olds, no matter the fantasy orientation construct. We also found several correlations between specific constructs of fantasy orientation and DCCS performance. The parents' report of pretense, which was the pretend play, both the parent and the child's report of fantasy-related toys and games, and the child's report of fantastical cognitions were positively correlated with better performance on DCCS. This goes along with a lot of the previous research, as a lot of research has found that greater performance on DCCS is correlated with more cognitive fantasy-related things. So this shows that children that have a higher fantasy orientation tend to have greater cognitive flexibility. So after doing my own research and looking through the previous research, I decided that imagination is a good thing. Now, of course, you have to keep it in moderation, like most things. You don't want the child's imagination to run their life and them not understand that they need to be in reality. But overall, having an imagination is good, and it leads to a fun and adventureful childhood, but also truly does help with their cognitive development. And also another important note for our adults too, seeing as all of us here are adults, is that having greater fantasy orientation, which can be seen in more creative jobs or hobbies, can lead to better behavioral and cognitive performance and help with age-related declines. Thank you.